No one knows what's coming next, or where all this is going. But if anyone can predict the future, it's us. Wherever you look, the challenges are daunting. From forecasting the next hurricane, to forecasting this year's hottest fashion trend. From solving supply chain disruptions, to solving what to watch tonight. From building sustainable solutions, to building his college fund. They all have one thing in common: you. Because data and AI are essential to solving all of them. And that puts you at the center. But you can't do it alone. It takes a team. It takes a community. We don't all come from the same place, but we're all heading in the same direction, side by side, heading toward the same destination, Lake House. In hindsight, the future was always clear. This is where we were always heading. To a place that's open to everyone, built for the way you work. So we can not only predict the future, but shape it together.
So after watching that intriguing video, are we all excited to see what the evening has in store for us? Come on, I'm sure you can give me a resounding yes. Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Sneha Jha, editor of ETCIO, and it is my honor and privilege to welcome you all to the Databricks Roadshow, brought to you by ETCIO in association with Databricks. This event is a confluence of business leaders, IT executives, digital champions, and data stewards from across industry verticals. It is very heartening to see so many of you here. I appreciate you taking out the time to be with us this evening. Today's event will facilitate discussion through a blend of interesting keynote sessions, presentations, and insightful, power-packed panel discussions that will inform, answer, inspire, and prepare you for the challenges ahead in a digital-first, data-led application economy. Our speakers are drawn from the ranks of seasoned practitioners and industry experts. We have well over 50 delegates from across industry verticals. So the networking opportunities over the evening are going to be quite exciting. Social media is a lifeline for the event, so please add your vision to the voice of our speakers and industry experts. Today we have with us industry practitioners who've been there, done that, and are here to help you with their insights and real-world scenario planning. I'd rather you heard from them than me. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd now like to invite upon stage Anil Bhasin, Vice President and Country Manager for Databricks India. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Anil. Take it away, Anil.
Thank you. As always, first test technology. So this is working, right? Thank you, Sneha, for this very warm welcome. I must admit it is a very surreal experience. For the past 3 years, to just meet people on Zoom with 95% of cameras being switched off, I never knew what kind of attention one was grabbing when you were talking, right? Today, for the first time, it's like that experience back to civilization. How many of you really think this is great? Yes? A lot of energy in the room. Yes? So for me, just getting to meet with you, be with you, share thoughts and ideas is really, I think, the best part of today's evening. And I really look forward to first welcoming all of you, On behalf of our partners, ETCIO, we believe they have the credentials and the credibility when we talk about the financial services market. And so it is very important that we make the evening useful. And we have a great agenda lined up for today evening, which I'd like to share with you in a moment. So if you just look, I'll briefly talk about, I don't know if you know enough about Databricks, that what does Databricks do? And then specifically in India, how can we help you? And I'm sure that's a question that you'd like to hear from, and I'll be very brief on that. We then will have Eon, who's actually a practitioner. He's one of those guys, lucky guys in our organization that does not carry a sales quota, right? And he's going to talk about his experience because he comes from the other side. He comes from being a customer, what he saw within Databricks, and then generically talk about the industry trends and how Databricks can be useful in your business, right? That's what Eon is going to talk about, and it's all focused around the customer and customer experience. So thank you for that, Eon. We then have two great panel discussions, and I'm not going to share that because it's an interesting one. When I went through the subject, the topics, the questions, this is going to be great, right? That's the best part of the evening, where you'll actually hear practitioners talk about their experience. And then finally, as always, we'll close up with networking dinner. Okay, where do we go from here? How many of you know Databricks? Just raise your hand. What is it that we do? That's a good way. If I was to kind of give you a very simple, I would say, comparative, when you think about, shoes, what do you think of? Nike. Think of your endpoint device, phone, you think of Apple. If I was to give you the key takeaway, we are the data AI company. Very simply put, what does Databricks do? We actually power all businesses through data and AI. And this concept of the lakehouse was created by Databricks. So if you've heard this term called lakehouse, we are the pioneers of that, right? We are the people who actually invented this so-called category called the lakehouse, and I'm sure we'll touch upon that as well. In the Gartner Magic Quadrant Leaders, if you go through that reports, we have been chosen as a market leader, both in terms of the database management, as well as in terms of data science and machine learning. There are logos, which I'm not going to go through, but we work with the best of the best, including the unicorns. And again, in India, we have a very solid presence. So globally, 7,000 customers, 5,000 employees. In India, we have 300 plus customers and a sizable set of employees here in India. It's roughly around 300 and growing. So in the so-called economic downturn, India is probably the one destination for Databricks which has seen, in terms of just the headcount growth, 3x in the last 3 months itself. So that should give you an idea of how important this market is for us. What should you look at, or what should you expect from Databricks in India specifically? So I just put this out for you to consume. 4 key things which we are really good at, where we can add value to your business. The first, we are very customer obsessed. And I would say the last point, if you read, we don't want to be your vendor, we want to be your partner. So let me just try and help you think through what is it that we are talking about when we say we want to be a strategic partner. Customer obsessed means you need to have skills, people who understand the business, people who understand the technology. So Eon is a great example of people who understand the business, practitioners, and we have great solution architects, seasoned specialist solution architects who can help you design your data architecture, right? So people who can help you design data strategy, people who can help you design your data architecture. And this is a big thing, it's not easy. Good part is we do it pro bono. We do it pro bono because we have the best, global best practices that we have accumulated, right? So that's skill on the ground locally available, the 300 plus people. We don't depend on external resources to come in. So we can all give you whatever you need in India. That's one. Second is we are very focused on an industry standpoint. So we understand the industry trends, in this case, financial services. We know what pain points this industry has because we work globally with all of the leading customers, whether it's on the banking side, capital markets, insurance, all of that, right? And we can bring that to bear with customer case stories or studies, which we have already accomplished in terms of what outcomes did we deliver. And there are solution accelerators. We have a great partner ecosystem for doing that. The second part of that, I think, is a lot of migration, we have this conversation on migration. We actually have a best practices on migration. If you want to migrate from X to Y, we actually have templates and we help our customers go through a wonderful customer experience on migration. So there is a lot of skill that we have locally that can help you think through some of that. I would stress on the point we actually create a competitive advantage. There are technologies which are business enabling technologies and there are technologies which are business differentiating technologies. We are in the business differentiation category, not business enablement category. Let me explain what that means. If you start thinking about, and this is something I'm sure Ian will share, there was a study that was done, the 30 companies that were completely data AI driven, and dare I say powered by Databricks, and their peer group which was not data AI driven. Guess what happened? The stock price of these 30 companies far outperformed their peers. I'm not suggesting because of Databricks, I'm just saying they were data AI driven, right? I believe therefore for us, the only way we can act is to help you become data AI driven, drive a data culture and make sure that you at your level see a innovation engine that's flowing within the organization in terms of designing your data AI strategy, making sure you have the right data architecture, there's a culture of innovation that is data driven. Once you have all these foundational things in place, your organization is definitely going to be a complete data driven organization, right? And I've already covered being a strategic partner. The definition of strategic partner is think ahead of you, but sit behind you as an extension of your team. Think ahead of you because that's my only job. 24/7, what do? We only look at data AI. That's not your core competency. You probably are a bank or an insurance company or whatever. My job, therefore, is to bring to bear all the best practices that we've seen work so that you don't get to make those mistakes or get to learn from what others have already achieved. So that's what we definitely want to do, but sit behind you so you don't see 1, 2, 3 people. It's not just the account manager and the SA. You see 5,000 people behind you who want to support you to be successful. That is called strategic partnership as a definition as far as I'm concerned. I hope you see us that way. And yes, you should hold us accountable when we make this claim. Just moving on very quickly, as always, technology. Yeah. So you would say, how do I test what you've just claimed, Anil? Simple. We've put some logos. We work across the spectrum of financial services. These are the best of the best, whether you take the Forbes 100 or you take the top unicorns. These are organizations that are leveraging Databricks today and have seen tremendous success. I would encourage you to ask us to come into your specific environment because each environment is different, to sit with you so that we can understand your business pain points and help you in this journey of moving to the lake house, which hopefully at scale will make you a differentiator. 600 plus FSI customers that we have today, 450 plus partners, and our partners are also very vertical oriented, right? So with that, I would say thank you again to our lovely panelists who've come here to share their experiences. I think all of us will enjoy that. I also want to kind of thank my supporting sponsors here. So we've got our partner Cellbuild Tech, very capable partners. They have solution accelerators, DG Leaguer. Thank you Microsoft to their entire team. We work very closely with Microsoft. They are a strategic partner. We are a first party service with Microsoft. And I think there are amazing success stories that we have with them, and Novigo Solutions. So with that, I'd like to invite my dear friend who's come all the way from London just for this event. And I promise I'm not joking, he's going back tomorrow morning. So he's going to talk about Customer 4.0. Please give it up for Ian Litty. Yeah.
Thanks, Anil. Hi, everyone. Really great to see such a nice group of people. It's my first time in India, and hopefully not the last. Anil has joked all day about how he's going to try and lure me away from the UK and get me to settle in India, because I gather from our conversations there, there's just so much opportunity here. So thank you very much. Thank you for everyone that's showed up. Just going to repeat Anil's question quickly. Just by show of hands, how many of you are familiar with Databricks? Because it's always good for me to also just see. Okay, all right, good. So just to get that little bit of a gauge. So as Anil said, my name is Ian. I'm a technical director for financial services at Databricks. As Anil said, I'm in the privileged position having worked in industry. I was a customer before. I've used Databricks personally and professionally for about 8 years now. So I've grown with the product and I've figured out how to build different solutions on it. And now I'm in the privileged position to talk tech and business with lots of companies around the world. And I like to actually say to people that although my title is technical director, I'm a glorified translator. I just translate some of the learnings from the technology world and the business world into some of these solutions. So I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about, in keeping with the theme about customer, the next generation customer, and I thought about, let's talk about customer 4.0. What does that mean? We know industry 4.0 has been coming for a while. Everyone's talking about that. But what actually drives all of that behind the scenes is customer 4.0. The customer has changed significantly. And the biggest challenge that we're facing today, if we want to answer some of these challenges that we're all talking about, data and AI, it comes back down to what the customer wants. They dictate. So in keeping with that, let me see, there we go. This is one of my favorite quotes. I don't know how many of you know Walton's in the US, very well-known brand worldwide, very big. But this is a quote from one of the founders, Sam Walton, that basically said there's only one boss, and that's the customer. The customer's got the power to fire everyone, all the way up to the chairman. If the customer's not buying from you, you're done. They actually make the decision. And I think that's very, very important. We need to realize that as we prepare for this new world that we're moving into, and understand the changes that's happened from the customer's perspective. Before we can talk about the rest, we need to understand this. We need to understand the customer is actually the boss. And we need to understand what it is that matters to them. And at the end of the day, it's these three things that truly matter to the next generation customer. It's about freedom, it's about progress, and it's about efficiency. Freedom, they want to be able to move around, not just physically, but they also want that freedom to move between vendors and products and service providers. It's not necessarily about lifting and shifting from one customer or one provider to another. It's the ability to leverage the best from different environments. That's where you get the whole movement around open banking, open finance that we're seeing, for instance, in the UK and the EU. It's about providing that freedom to the customer. That's a very demanding ask. If you think about the traditional ways of banking, the traditional ways of insurance, the way we've been approaching finance for pretty much since forever, this is a really difficult ask. And the second one, progress, is an interesting one. Initially, I had it there as gains or return, and then I thought it's actually a bit deeper than that. The next generation customer cares about what they get out of the system. Right? There's definitely a monetary component to it, but it's about much more than that. There's also a progress component. There's a very big movement in change. They want to move forward. And I always take the example of Apple and Samsung. If you look at the two companies, why does Samsung have that base of customers that moves with them? And they've been able to take customers away from Apple. It's because of that progress. The product just progressed a hell of a lot quicker than Apple. Now, we can argue again how Apple kept some of their customers because their customers were caring more about some of the other factors. But it's an interesting thing. We need to think about that progress element as we build for that future. And efficiency is a fairly self-explanatory one. It's about time. What we need to realize is the next generation that came into the world now realize that we've been doing this all wrong all along. We've cared about our jobs, we've cared about our work-life balance. And I actually heard someone say this yesterday, it's not a work-life balance, it's a life-life balance. And that's what really matters to the next generation customer. Their time matters more. They want to retire in their 30s and do what they want when they want. So we need to rethink the whole thing. And the important thing for me there, that I put there at the top, is also perception matters. It's something that changed a lot with the way customers used to think. How customers are perceived by their peers matters a lot more. And that feeds into all three of these categories, whether that is freedom or progress or efficiency. How they're perceived matters a lot. So the interesting thing is, over and above that, over and above those customer challenges, we are facing a lot of challenges in the economy out there. We're facing challenges in competition. We're facing challenges economically. We all know what's happening in the world right now. There's this massive downturn, but it's also a very interesting downturn because have we reached the bottom? Have we not? How bad can this get? I've seen some really dim numbers on where it's going or where it could be going. And then you get people that say, no, it's not going to be that bad. So we need to think about that. And then regulation. Regulation in finance is always there. But what's happened, if we think about the previous 3 kind of goals for the next generation customer, that regulation is changing a lot faster because it has to keep in touch with where the customer is going. Freedom drives a lot of this regulation. That drive for freedom, because you still need to govern some of these components. So we need to figure out how are we actually going to solve for those key challenges from the customer's perspective, and how are we going to adapt to these world economics or these conditions that's at play. There we go. That's better. If we start at the competition end, because I specifically want to talk about 2 of those 3, which is the competition and the economics of it. If we start on the competition side, what we're seeing is fintechs, especially in FS. I mean, this is true for any industry. Startups are really cannibalizing markets right now, but especially in FS, fintechs are taking over. And the reason why they're doing this is because they completely understand those new asks from the customer, on the one hand side, but on the other hand, they also don't have the legacy challenges we have. Right? As incumbents, naturally, we have a lot of legacy challenges that's difficult for us to fix. But this is a really big problem. Fintechs are eating our lunch. We need to figure out how do we solve for this. And the interesting thing behind this, there's this quote that says the battle between startups and incumbents is going to come down to who wins innovation and distribution at the same time. Because on the one hand, you have fintechs, or startups, whichever way you want to look at it, that's solving the innovation component. And then you have the incumbents that have the distribution component locked down. So the interesting thing is, who's going to win which? The challenge is that I would argue for some fintechs, it's easier to solve distribution than it is for some fintechs to solve innovation. And that's our biggest challenge when we look at it from that perspective. So we need to bear that in mind. There we go. And if we just double click on some of those challenges we're seeing across the board, these are still some of the barriers to innovation that we're seeing in FS today. Same challenges we've been talking about for ages. Data trapped in silos. How do we scale for volume or velocity? Simplifying governance. Governance is probably the biggest headache that everyone talks to me about at the moment. So how do we solve governance? And then the last one, which is my personal favorite, is how do we partner? Because the interesting thing is, this is my personal opinion, is that the solution to either side of the coin, whether you're a fintech trying to solve for distribution, or whether you're an incumbent trying to solve for innovation, the answer actually lies in that one. It lies in the partnering side. When we partner, we do things better, and we can overcome some of these barriers. So that's a challenging one. Let me try. Oops, there we go. If we look at the economic side of things, so taking just a little bit step back, we've got other challenges. With this downturn, there's a much bigger scrutiny on the bottom line. The bottom line is starting to matter. Costs matter. Returns matter. And we've got this problem that we need to focus on our net profits. We need to focus on our ROA. We need to focus on our leverage. And all of these are actually geared in driving your ROE. And we're having a lot of conversations at the moment where the CFOs are dominating the conversation, where they say, at the end of the day, this is what we care about. So it's becoming difficult. There's this duality that lives at the moment in finance. There's this want for growth that we've seen over the last couple of years. But at the same time, the economy is pulling everyone back to say, well, we can't really just spend frivolously anymore. We still need to think about this because we've kind of lost sight about this for a while there. And we need to figure out how we're going to solve this. Now, the interesting thing for me is, when I look at this, because finance institutions have been investing to solve some of these problems for more than a decade. Data is not a new thing. Data and AI is not a new thing. We've been talking about it for ages. The interesting thing for me about this is a Forbes study that's done, at least to my knowledge, every year. This is the results from last year, where they take some of the biggest customers globally, not just FS, so this is across the board, and they ask them a couple of key questions to rate themselves across those 7 different areas and see where they are and how do they rate themselves. The interesting thing for me, if we look at the results from the last 3 years, let's see if I can get that to work. There we go. That part for me is extremely concerning if you think about what that number reflects, or let's say the lack of those numbers reflect, is that for the 2 years prior to last year, none of these companies felt that they had a well-architected data strategy. That's really concerning. That's scary. Because if you think about it, we talk data strategy, we try different things, but clearly when it comes down to us sitting in an anonymous booth and having to say where we really are, we're actually not doing that great. And the interesting thing is, if we look at last year's number, it's only a third of those companies, and these are big names. These are not small companies that have been dabbling in data. They've invested billions, and still they're missing the mark, according to themselves. And the interesting thing for me is that there's a correlatory effect on two areas. And the one area for me is one of my personal favorites, is data culture. If you look at what's happening to data culture, it's actually diminishing, which makes sense. If you don't have a strategy to build trust in your data, there's going to be no adoption of that data. You're not going to build a data-driven culture. It's not going to exist. And tied to that, when people don't feel like they trust the data and they can use it, well, guess what? There's no innovation with it. There was a slight spike initially. We can argue about what caused that. The interesting thing is look at the fall after that. So clearly we need to think about this differently. We need to come at it from a different angle. And this is the interesting thing for me. Sorry, my animation's not working greatly today. But basically, this is one of the things that I found interesting when I looked at this. Why are companies still missing the mark? Why is the investment not going where it should be? And the challenge for me always comes back to this. When we set out, we all focused on AI. We always tend to focus on the AI component, which is great. When I talk to companies, when I was a CDO in the industry and I would go around to different companies, talk about what it is they want to do, they all talk about ML and AI, and they've got all these great use cases lined up. The problem is that we tend to forget where the value actually lies. The value is not tied to the AI. The value is actually intrinsic to the data. It's a very, very different way of thinking when you structure your strategy. And very important, and now we go back to the difference between some of the companies that get this right and some of the companies that struggle, is that data has a duality in its value that we need to understand and we need to think about. There's a fundamental component that we need to understand. There's intrinsic value, there's strategic value, there's operational value. If you think about some of the companies like Netflix, how do they value their data? They look at it from a fundamental perspective. They look at the operational value and the strategic value. That's what drives their content. There's no financial value tied to it. That's the secondary side of it. So if you look on the financial side, there's cost value, market value, economic value. Now, that's a very different thing. And what we're seeing is, for instance, in the finance space, especially if you're operating with payments, there's a lot of opportunity in financial value for your data. But what you've got to realize is when you structure your data strategy, you've got to first admit and understand that there's this duality in your data's value, and you've got to understand where is it that you want to play. You don't have to pick just one. You can pick more than one, but you need to have that view very clear in your data strategy from day one, because otherwise, where are you going? So we need to think about that. And the way we see it, and the way we see companies think about this, starts by thinking about this open future. It starts with transforming three core areas of the business. It starts by transforming the operating model, the business model, and the technology model. And it all centers around these open standards, whether that's open source to change our technology, whether that's open standards to change our operating model, or open finance that governs our new pricing structures or our business model. But there's this change that's happening, and we need to rethink how we position ourselves in that space, because we have to reposition ourselves in such a way that we can actually adapt to this changing world. I always say when you think about your data strategy, you've got to think about three things. You've got to think about the longevity of the strategy, the scalability of the strategy, and the extensibility. And that's what this aims to do, is it aims to get financial institutions in a better position where they can actually address some of these key challenges. The other interesting thing off the back of that is this. This is one of my favorite quotes at the moment. I don't know, I've actually joked about this recently, whether I should change Elon Musk's name to Anonymous, because a year ago he was very popular, and at the moment I don't know. But the gist of what he's saying here is that we need to be very honest with ourselves about what we should optimize and what we should replace. what shouldn't exist in the first place? That could mean replace, or it could mean just kill it off entirely. Because as we think about those transformation areas in our business, in our operating model, in our technology model specifically, we're going to have to encounter this question time and again. And the one thing that I think we as finance really struggle with is this problem. We've spent decades becoming really good at optimizing what shouldn't exist. And we need to fix that. That's why fintechs are eating our lunch. Why? Because they are building stuff that we never thought about. They're not optimizing something, they're actually building what should have existed. And the example that I always take off the back of that, if I can get it forward, is just going back to Musk's world. If you think about SpaceX, when they approached the area of rocketry, one of the biggest challenges they had was the cost of a launch. So it was really expensive because every time you've got to re-engineer the entire rocket, the bulk component of it, that motor, it's really expensive. And the challenge is that for 6 decades, everyone's just been saying, well, there's nothing we can do about it. We'll shoot the rocket up and let the motor burn out, or we'll just leave it in space, becomes part of the space junk issue, and we never even figure out how to solve it. And then SpaceX came, and within 4 years, I actually went back to check the timeline. From the day they announced that they're going to land rocket motors back on Earth to the day they had the first successful landing was 4 years. 4 years to do something that an industry couldn't do in 6 decades. Why? Because they asked the simple question, what should we optimize and what should not exist? And they used data to do this. The mechanics behind it's quite complex, but it's a simple theory and it's a simple problem to just fix. And that's the way we need to think as finance when we go forward. We need to ask ourselves, should we just be sending the rocket out into space and just forgetting about it? Or should we actually be bringing it back? Should we find a way to bring it back? This is a different way of thinking about it. And that's where we came up with this lakehouse concept. It's essentially this idea of crossing the chasm that I've been talking about lately. You used to have, on the one hand, this old world of data warehousing. It's very structured, really good for batch operation, great for automated reporting, but it only solves one part of the problem. And then on the other hand, you've got your lake, which is great for streaming, it's great for intelligence operations, it's great for automated decisioning, but it's, again, not great for what a warehouse is great for. And the problem is, what we've seen in industry is companies would have to build anywhere from 2 to 4 different stacks to solve that unification problem of bringing their teams together. And that's ultimately what the lakehouse is about. The lakehouse is very simply this concept that breaches that gap between the two, lives in the middle. It gives you the ability to do your warehouse-like analytics workloads on it, and at the same time, do your intelligence workloads on it. And the great thing about it is that there's only one copy of data. So you lose that need for data duplication, you lose that need for movement of data unnecessarily. It simplifies the governance challenges around this through that one simple step. And that's what the lakehouse is all about. And if we look at how customers are using this already, I wanted to pick on 3 specific examples. The first one is HSBC. So this is specifically what HSBC did in Hong Kong with an app they call PayMe, which is a peer-to-peer payments app. And the great thing for me was the reason why they went with Databricks, not what they've achieved. If we look at the numbers, they've done some great things. They've taken 14 different data lakes, and they've replaced that with one lakehouse, which is fascinating. They've taken some of their processing times down from 6 hours to 6 seconds. And they've seen a 4.5x improvement in customer engagement. All great numbers. But for me, it's the why they did this that was great. It was because they wanted to change the way they develop their products. They wanted to become data-led in how they develop their products. And they wanted to build a platform that enables everyone to do that. And the interesting thing is what happened. They did this within 18 months. They had 1.8 million users on the platform. They controlled 60% of the local market, which is fascinating. Today, I think the number's actually gone up. I think they now have 2.8 million customers on the platform. But the interesting thing is when they did this, they realized that the bulk of the payments were not happening peer-to-peer. Actually, the bulk of the payments were happening customer to business, so to a merchant. And then what they did is they took this product and they developed a business offering, so a commercial offering. And that product has gone from strength to strength. Now, they've done a lot of other great things, but that's how customers are leveraging the platform, thinking about things differently. The other one we've got, there we go, is coins.ph. So this is a Filipino-based entity. Also great numbers if you look at some of the statistics there, reduction in claims or complaints, reduction in their operating cost and their infrastructure cost. The numbers speak for itself. In their case, the why was very different. In their case, it was about moving away from all the day-to-day stuff around DevOps and getting that out of the way, simplifying a lot of the engineering workflows to get to the point where they can enable their teams to really drive an intelligence-based solution and build their intelligence refinery. And that's what they've done. They've completely revamped the way that they do all of their fraud stuff, all of their fin crime operations. It's completely driven by Databricks now. And that's why you see some of these numbers. It's because they rethought that process and replaced some of those core basic engineering components with a simple solution and a single platform. And the last one I wanted to pick on is AIA on the insurance side. Again, a very different why to the others. In AIA's case, it was a very simple case of modernizing their warehouse. They had a warehouse, they had a lot of financial service advisors, they were struggling with scale, they couldn't figure out how to propagate the data through to everyone as fast as they could, and that's why they went with Databricks. So they put everything into the lakehouse, it scaled a lot better, it was a lot more efficient for them to propagate everything out. That's why they saw the uplift in customer engagement and the uplift in lead generation. And then as a result, off the back of that, they then also had the platform to start building some of the intelligence capabilities that they never could do before. So it's two birds, one stone kind of a situation. But the interesting thing for me always with these three cases is three very different whys. One wanting to be data-driven, one wanting to build an intelligence refinery, and one just wanting to modernize a warehouse. Very different whys, but the platform solves for all of these challenges with one single solution. And that's the power of the lakehouse. When we tie it back to that strategy, that's what it showcases for you, is that ability to become flexible and addressing those issues. And the interesting thing for me always is we get this question a lot. So this is great, but I've got some other tools that I want to use. That's no problem. It was built from the ground up to play well with others. So whatever you want to use, whether you use different tools for data ingestion or data governance or MI and BI, it doesn't really matter. It bolts on top of this. So you can build your modern data stack. The way that I always explain to people is that you're building a strong engine that drives everything else. And we see that a lot. We see a lot of customers use not just one specific tool, they actually bolt on some of the other tools, but the engine is driven by the lakehouse. And that's what drives that efficiency gain in the end, not just in cost and performance, but also that enablement and that propagation across the organization, because that's what it's about. If you can't actually get people enabled and bought into it, then we're sitting with the same problem of not having that culture where people want to do something. What we've done on top of this from an FSI perspective, if I can get it to go on, is we've built this, what we call the Lakehouse for financial services specifically. Because what we're doing is much more than just a platform as a service, much more than just pieces of software that we've stitched together that gives you a lot of ability, but we wanted to go beyond that. We wanted to actually make this an ecosystem where you can actually leverage a lot of best practices and learnings from across the industry. And that's what we've done, especially with things like our solution partners. We partner very closely with them. Things like Finos. I don't know if any of you are aware of Finos, or have heard of Finos. It's essentially the Linux Foundation for Financial Services. We did a lot of work with them recently around data modeling. They've got a project called Legend, which was originally built by Goldman Sachs. It's all focused on data modeling capabilities. Legend built it initially to solve some of their core issues, and then they open sourced it and actually provided it or gave it to Finos. And we recently partnered with them to build a connector for Finos directly into Databricks. And we're doing, my counterpart in the US is actually, as we speak, he's doing a talk with Finos in the US on just that specific component. And then the other one we've got is our Solution Accelerator program, which is very popular. What we do is we look at some of the most prevalent use cases that we see across the board when we talk to customers, and we build potential solutions for that. On open source data, it's not a be-all and end-all, it's not a product off the shelf, it's to showcase the art of the possible, it's to bring a different way of thinking, because again, that's what we're all about. It's thinking differently to solve some of these core challenges. And what we're seeing with that program is, and I should mention that it's all open sourced. All of those solutions are completely open sourced. It's available on GitHub. You can download the notebooks and the code and see how it's run. We've had customers win awards. We built one solution around ESG, and there's a big Swiss-based insurer that actually took that solution, made it their own, and they've won 2 awards off the back of that. And we see at least a 2x acceleration on companies that utilize those accelerators as the basis for their POCs and their MVPs. So it really accelerates that journey. But this is the other thing that I just wanted to mention. This is an article that was published in 2020 by Andreessen Horowitz, which is incidentally one of our key investors. And they said, in the future, every company will be a fintech company. And the interesting thing for me about this is that this should either scare or excite you. The interesting thing about this is that what this tells me is that it's going to become impossible to compete with everyone. We just can't. If every company becomes a fintech company, it becomes mathematically impossible that we can all compete and still get the same slice of pie. So what this means is we're going to have to think about partnering. Going back to that original point, how do we solve some of these key challenges for our customer? We have to think about partnering. And I have this phrase that I use lately called partner or perish. I've spent a couple of years in academia as well, and there's a phrase in Western academia called publish or perish. Basically just says if you don't publish, it doesn't matter because no one's agreed on it. And it's going to be the same for FS especially. We have to figure out how do we partner, because if we don't, we're going to perish. So very, very important. And that's what it comes back down to. When we look at the data maturity curve, we use this curve a lot to assess where we are. We use this curve to assess where our customers are and be a guiding light for your strategy. And the interesting thing for me always is if you look at the far left and the far right, it starts with trusted data. We have to build that trust in that platform, have to enable everyone and actually get them bought into it. But it ends at the end with data partnerships. When we partner, we're better together. And we have to get to that point. And if we think about how the companies have done this, that have done really well, is about approaching it like the way that we think about the circular economy. It's that idea of reduce, reuse, repurpose. And a lot of people ask me when I say reduce, they say, well, what do you mean by that? We can't throw away this part of the technology estate. We can't do that. Yes, I get that. It's not about simplifying and throwing away things unnecessarily. We have to simplify our mentality. We have to think about our architecture. Simplify the architecture. You can still use multiple tools. We saw that. You can integrate different tools to get to the same place. That's not the problem. We have to simplify the architecture. Otherwise, we're going to run into a problem. The reuse bit is simple. We have to get to that point where we take data sets and make it available across the organization to be reused. We all know the phrase around data democratization and all of those things. It comes back down to how do we facilitate that sharing component. And the one that I'm always interested in is the last one, that repurpose bit. The repurpose bit is very much about taking data that's been applied in one way for many, many years and rethinking about how we can apply that in another area. I'm going to go back to the example of SpaceX. The data was there to all those companies. NASA had data on tons of launches. They never repurposed it until SpaceX came along and said, but hang on, we have this data. Let's repurpose it. And you see the power. And that's the thing we've got to think about. And I'll end off with tying back to Anil's point. There we go. This is the graph that Anil spoke about in his opening. We basically went and we looked at some of the top customers using Databricks, and not just about using Databricks, but that actually moved towards that space of having a well-functioning data culture, where they're truly data-led, data-driven, data-minded. And then what we looked is we looked at their share price and we compared it to the S&P 500 over a period of time. And there's two interesting things. The interesting thing is what happened around March 2020, when the whole world changed with COVID. What you see is you immediately see that rapid acceleration in value away from the S&P 500 for the companies that were truly data-minded. It shows you that potential, that catapult effect that happens there when you're truly data-driven and data-led. That's the first interesting thing. And the other interesting thing is what happens at the end, that even in a time of downturn, those companies are still outperforming their peers. And by our estimation, it's about 23 percentage points. There was a study by McKinsey recently, I think it was McKinsey, that corroborated this independently. They found around 20+% outperformance for the companies that actually take this approach to companies that don't. So I'll leave you with that thought. It's about that size of the prize at the end. We have to think about our customer very, very differently. Their needs and their asks have changed. But the other thing we've got to bear in mind is that it's continuously changing. They're not going to stop just now. So we have to think about how do we remain agile and adaptable to those asks. And that comes down to that core issue around your architecture and your culture. Have you architected for a very simple world that can be extended and scale with your changes and your asks? And have you built a culture where people are truly bought into this and trust the data to drive the product innovation and actually deliver what your customer is asking? Because otherwise, if we cannot do this, we can just go and look back in the 90s, what happened to some of the companies, what happened in the early 2000s. We all know the examples of the Kodaks and the Blockbusters, etc. It's fairly simple, not staying in touch with the customer and understanding where they're going. And next to that, not having the ability to actually rapidly address some of those needs. Because just knowing what the customer wants is one half of it. Having the ability to address it is the other half. So I thank you. It was really great to chat to you. I hope this was useful. I'll be around and we'll have the panel discussions in a bit to dive into it a bit more. But please, if you see me afterwards and have a question, please reach out. And yeah, looking forward to what we can do in the Indian market with Anil and the team here and see, hopefully, if we do another talk in a couple of months' time, we can put some Indian examples on here and showcase some of the potential that's happening here in the market, because I think there's incredible potential here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jon, for that interesting, insightful, and very, very comprehensive presentation that spoke about how the growth story is unfolding in the financial services industry, the competitive pressures that are stretching the contours of the industry, the technology roadmap that organizations should be adopting to simplify their data architecture to then be able to create data-led intelligent organizations. And with that, we move on to the next segment of the evening, which is an interactive panel discussion. The topic for this discussion is demystifying data architecture for a digital-first business model in BFSI. And may I now call upon stage my esteemed set of panelists. They are Sameer Jadhav, EVP, Aditya Birla Capital. Ladies and gentlemen, can we have a huge round of applause for our panelists? Kishan Kumar, Group CTO, Ask Asset and Wealth Management. KV Deepu, Senior President, Bajaj Allianz General Insurance. And once again, can we have on stage Jon Retif, Technical Director, Databricks. So ladies and gentlemen, let's try a narrative by numbers today. Now, according to a report published by McKinsey Global Institute, companies that leverage data are 23 times more likely to acquire new customers. They are 6 times more likely to retain the existing customers and 19 times more likely to be profitable than their industry rivals. Now, data is creating winners in business is a resounding truism by now. And organizations that are born digital or are digitally agile, future-focused organizations are leaning in on data to create their next competitive differentiation. Now, with all of this in mind, the data and AI leaders believe in 4 cardinal truths. The first one is that AI and ML are the future. The second one is that organizations need open source and open formats. The third one is that multi-cloud is the model that most organizations are moving towards. And the fourth fact remains that organizations need to leverage a simple data architecture to then be able to derive data-led insights from their data. Now, while all of this is very true, but it's still very hard to bring all of this in practice and operation within an organization. Forbes believes that 73% of organizations are still struggling to work with the data and to derive insights from it. And Forrester attests this further by saying that 50% of the organizations don't even know what to do with the data that they are gathering. So while organizations appreciate the fact that data is a first-class citizen, a first-class asset, but do they really know how to go about deriving insights and intelligence from that data? That's a conundrum that we'll try and solve with the great minds present here on stage. And they will talk to us about how you can demystify data by creating a simple data architecture. So with that, I'll address my first question to Mr. Jadhav. Mr. Jadhav, data in the financial services industry is a first-class citizen. It's the soil on which new business models can then germinate. But in a regulated industry, how do you decide what are the key business imperatives that you want to work around with data? How do you go about creating the use cases, a data strategy for yourself, for your organization?
Thanks, Neha. So I think from a data strategy perspective, we at Aditya Birla Capital think about how we can leverage this to create a competitive advantage for our company. And I would point at two key examples of what we are working on with data and AI. The first is hyper-personalized customer engagement, right? Eon showed examples of HSBC and AIA. And if you saw on both, the key metric was the customer engagement. So let me elaborate this with a small example. You've all experienced motor insurance, right? So when are the two times when motor insurance company engages with a customer? It's at a buy stage and at the renewal stage. What happens between that 1 year, right? So what are those key engagement points that I can really identify? What data can I collect about the customer driving behavior? Or how can I leverage AI to be engaging with the customer between these two touch points is what really is going to create a competitive advantage for a motor insurance company. So similar examples exist in other financial services sectors as well. So first is how do I leverage data and AI to create a hyper-personalized customer engagement? And second, I think Eon mentioned about partnerships, right? And we are also working with new age digital ecosystem partners like Ola, Make My Trip, Amazon, right? To see how we can, create contextual products for these partners. I'll give you a small example. During COVID, we launched a very small ticket COVID cover for any customer that takes a cab ride, right? Customers were hesitant to take cab rides because of the fear of catching COVID. So by offering that COVID cover, which covers 15 days, if you catch COVID, you're covered for COVID hospitalization. So that helped us get 2 lakh plus customers in a single day. We had never experienced something like that. So just imagine this is just one example, but the next point comes, that's a very small COVID cover and I'm not going to make money from it. So how do I leverage data from alternate data sources, like say his Ola trip rights or his Ola, transaction history to create a pre-approved financial services product for the customer. So the next big point is how do I leverage data from alternate data sources like say a customer transaction history on Amazon, his history with a telecom company, and really use that, ingest that data to really, create a personalized next best offer for that customer that the customer might be interested in. So these are two things I feel which can really create a competitive advantage for us. And it's really hard for competitors to, easily, copy or mimic this. So that's my response.
Right. Perfect. Thank you so much, Mr. Jadhav. You gave us some great points around hyper-personalization, contextual products, and in coming up with services that organizations need. I'd like to build this up further with Mr. Deepu. Mr. Deepu, we are in an age where organizations need to harvest the customer data to create hyper-personalized experiences, to come up with opportunities for embedded finance, because that's where the industry is headed. So while organizations try to do all of this and try to unlock the data-led ecosystem opportunities. Most organizations believe that they are still struggling with AI because they don't have the trust in their data, the veracity of their data. How do you think organizations should go about dealing with that challenge? What have you done with your data strategy to make it more meaningful and so that it helps you then build intuitive, intelligent, agile customer experiences?
Thank you, Sneha. It was a very long question, and I was absorbing it, in terms of trying to, answer your query. And I see a lot of hungry faces as well, so, try and keep it crisp. I think the key when it comes to, leveraging AI, the point that you made, in terms of firms don't know what to do with data. We are firm believers in the fact that it has to be customer first, and AI or any form of technology second. And I think the best way to illustrate that is to share a couple of examples. I'll pick a cue from the point he made on motor insurance, right? He spoke about the buy at the renewal stage. The moment of truth in the insurance industry is claims. You buy the product because that's the time, you want the insurance company to come to you, to come to your aid. So I'll give an example of how we've leveraged data and AI, to make a difference. And here, I'll also, take a different path, because, you once spoke about the fact that every company is going to be a fintech and, fintechs are going to have us for lunch. But the point is, while they may have solutions, they don't have expertise. So the example I'm going to give you, we'll talk about that. So let's say, you had an insurance policy, or rather you have a motor insurance policy and you crash your car. What would you normally do? You would call up the insurance company, they would send a surveyor to the site, he would take his own time to come there, he can't come there immediately, right? And then he'll assess the extent of damage, file the report, and then the whole process kicks in. So what we've done with the help of data and AI is now, up to certain limits, we don't need to call a surveyor. Now we have empowered the customer. It's just a two-step process. You take photographs of the car and you upload them using the mobile app, just 2 clicks. And up to certain amounts, within 20 minutes, the AI engine will assess the extent of damage and get back to you with the amount. You give your consent, the money is transferred to you. Now here, if you see, we have leveraged data because we have had to go through years of expertise to figure out how to approve these claims. A new player cannot do it. You can get caught and you may end up approving fraudulent claims. That's where expertise and solutions come in. And even the point on partnership here is valid because we had to work with partners to ensure this happens. That's how we were able to add value. And I'll give you one more example of how we were able to leverage data to come up with a customer experience which didn't exist before. Many of you would have heard of telematics or IoT, Internet of Things, whereby if you place a device in your car, you can make it a smart car and then you get feedback on your driving behavior, the way you drive, and you can have a more informed conversation with the insurance company when the policy is up for renewal. We said everybody will do this, right? Everybody will give you a device and then, you will basically focus on giving this data. And to the point Anil made, how do you differentiate yourself? How do you stand out even as you give this offering? So we came out with a feature called geofencing. So what happens in geofencing is, now that we know the car, is smart, we can track it. Let's say there's a working couple and they both are going to to office, and the driver picks up kids and drops them, and they are worried about children's safety. They can mark the traditional routes. These are the standard routes from office to home or office to school or school to daycare center. If the car is taken on a completely different route, you get an alert. Now, this is not possible without the usage of data, and the accompanying tech solution. So that's how, we've been able to put the customer first, understand clearly the pain points, apply AI, apply data, and come up with solutions which have been really meaningful. And the outcome of this is seen in the NPS scores that we have got. For example, in motor, we really outshine our competitors and by a significant distance, and this is conducted by a third party.
Thank you so much, Mr. Deepu. Now, Mr. Kumar, Mr. Deepu, and also Mr. Jadhav spoke about putting the customer first, understanding the immediate requirements of the customer. Now, customer loyalty today is very fickle, especially with the millennial customers, because their expectations are constantly changing and constantly upgrading. So in an industry where customer loyalties are fickle, there is regulation, there is competitive pressure from market disruptors like fintechs, your only compelling differentiation is a better customer experience. So how do you leverage data and AI to be able to provide contextual, transparent, and enriching customer experiences?
Thanks, Neil. As far as our industry, the asset and wealth management is concerned, it's always a regulated industry. That's not something that is new today. It's always been there and will continue to be there. Only the pace of regulation seems to have accelerated much more because of certain conditions today. And as we say, the more things you use, more regulations kicks in. So the freedom is curtailed. So that's exactly what Ion had suggested, but that's what is happening. As far as wafer thin margins, customer experience, and other things concerned, there are multiple ways of looking at it. Because the first thing is, it's actually the availability of data and information across on the net. So basically, we will say democratization of data, which is a common term in all presentations wherever you go. But the point is, how exactly is that being democratized? And I say fintechs have done it well. Fintechs have really used it well. And I think it's for traditional companies to actually catch up on those things. Maybe there are different types of data that you would look at. One is the internal data, the operations data, the business data, and the customer data. So if you look at all these three combinations, that's the winning combination. It's just not one part of the data that one needs to look at. So that's an area which is really an interesting thing, which one needs to look at. Secondly, the industry also has gone through a major churn. The products which were once available only for the HNI and other people is now being democratized, and a normal investor wants it. He says, why should I be out of this race? That's where the difference is. The second or third important thing that I could look into is the curation of a platform. Each person, we always say hyper personalized, personalized, and everything. But when it comes to an individual, is it really personalized? I don't think so. I think there's a lot of things that needs to be there, and today's youngsters are actually demanding, you please understand me. You understand my requirements. Where am I? What is my position? You can't say it's a 25-year-old guy or a 25 to 35 working in a company and start doing things. It's basically to say that I am an individual. This is what I get. How am I going to do? So that's actually a curation. And if you have to do curation of things for you, whether it's whatever be the product, you really need to have data behind that. So unless you understand the data behind it, you cannot curate a platform. You cannot create anything which is unique to the individual. All the other things are simply you put it across on a web and say, I click on it and do that. No, that's not what the market demands. So that's the most important change. And the last point that you mentioned was on the margins, wafer thin margins. Obviously, because if you don't create platforms, people are not willing to pay you. People will pay you only if you see value in that. And secondly, if you go at an ultra high net worth customers, yes, somebody would have invested a million, 100 million, 50 million kind of things. But then your margins are going to be, because you're not going to be able to charge them those fees. So that's what is going to drive the whole thing. So if you are looking at margins, you better have a product which is there. And all these things are data driven. And of course, the most important thing, customer service. Customer service is beyond doubt. It's not only today's time, but it's also in the past as well. So unless you have information, unless you understand the customer better, how are you going to service him? So customer service by default comes into these areas. The last but not the least, when you come to investments and other areas, today is the time when the traditional way of looking at balance sheets no longer exists. Today, people want to see how is it driven by data. Actually, the entire analysis of industry and markets are getting done on systems. And the traditional people who used to look at cash flows and PEs and ratios which are there are no longer getting done on that. So investment cycles are changing. The way you predict the market and you predict the future, that's getting changed. The way the industry is looking at the numbers is getting changed. And finally, the way the customers are looking at it changed. So all these factors contribute to this kind of an era where whether you digitize, whether you operationalize, whether you do whatever, at the end of things, data drives everything, and that's what the reality is.
True. Now, Ian, you heard the gentleman talk about what they're doing within their organizations with data and AI. Now, there was a study, MIT research, in which Databricks collaborated with MIT research and found out that 78% of the organizations believe that leveraging AI is the most important part of their data strategy by 2025. So, what do you think organizations should be doing to leverage AI effectively and efficiently within their organizations?
So I think firstly, all the comments and the points that my co-panelists made were some really good points and some really interesting ones. I think the first thing for me comes back to what I said earlier in the presentation. When you think about AI and ML, yes, that should be the end goal, but you should almost view it like it's that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So there's still that journey that you've got to go through to actually achieve that. So you still have to think about the architecture. You've got to think about the data, because ultimately the data qualifies what you get out. We all know the saying of garbage in, garbage out, and that's very true. And actually, I think it's part of that study where one of the surveyed companies made the statement that they actually prefer less data but greater quality. They get greater insights out of less data but of higher quality. And I think that's what it's one of the things to just always bear in mind is the data is still where the value lies. The AI is how it manifests. It's one part of how it manifests, but you still have to treat the data well. And then I think the other thing especially we need to think about is we tend to have this idea when we think about ML and AI projects that we tend to go for the big wins. We think about the low-hanging fruit, but somehow companies always tend to go for the big fancy stuff, the things that's going to look great on a PowerPoint slide, the things that's going to impress the board when we do something with it. And I get the appeal for that. But typically, especially in FS, when you venture down that road, what happens is that you're venturing down the road where you encounter use cases that are highly regulated, highly governed, really dependent on high quality data that most of these organizations are still grappling with. So what I tend to say to companies is go for the smaller things, go for the easy wins, go for the unregulated parts of your business where you can hone your skills. And one of the things I always find interesting was Jeff Bezos' approach with Amazon, where he basically mandated to all of his departments to use ML and AI. He didn't care how it was used. He just mandated that every time there was an update, they should report on something they've done with ML. Whether that was a success, whether it was a failure, whether it was productionized or not, couldn't care less. Because the biggest challenge to reaching that goal in terms of that strategy is we need to practice this new skill. The problem is we're still crawling in this age of AI and ML. We've been playing with it for a while, but we're still crawling. And we need to learn how to run, but that's going to take some time to walk.
Right. Now, Mr. Deepu, when we talk about data warehouse, data lakes, master data management, and even Hadoop, there's been a lot of hype around all of these, but they've failed to live up to their promise. Do you see the data lakehouse concept solving some of the problems that were originally envisioned for each of these things in terms of handling the AI workloads, handling all the data silos, dealing with the data sprawl, data management issues? Do you see it as a contender for the future of a modern data strategy and data platform?
Definitely yes, because if you look at a data lakehouse, it basically combines the best of data warehouse as well as a data lake. There are quite a few benefits which can come in. One is you don't have a two-tier structure, right? It's all in one place, so that has its own benefits. You can avoid storage costs, and to the point that Ian made, even something like data deduplication, that becomes a huge day-to-day challenge, right? Let's look at low-hanging fruit. Let's not necessarily think about long-term benefits. So these benefits come in when you have a lake house. Also, sometimes, and I'm just putting it slightly colorfully, what we sometimes think is a data lake can actually be a data swamp, right? You may not have, data in the right form and fashion, so that's where it can help. So I think this monolithic structure, getting it all together. And also the other point is you combine, data in one place, including unstructured data, along with the ability to get full value through analytics. So I think that's where lakehouse can clearly come in, and I think it's early stages, but I think we're seeing a lot of green shoots.
Right. Now, Mr. Kumar, the promise of a data lakehouse is very compelling in terms of low cost, better manageability, being able to address the BI data science challenges, the data engineering, fewer platforms, less cost. So it's a compelling promise. But do you see, but the data warehouses are not giving up without a fight. So do you see a battle royale starting between a cloud data warehouse and a cloud data lakehouse?
Well, I don't see much of that as a challenge. The only thing that I, as an end user and as a customer, would want is a real-time data. That's primary for me. The second important point is I can't have this distinction between historical data stored in some place and some part of data stored somewhere. So that doesn't work out. So the point that today you could have multiple warehouses and multiple lakes and oceans, all those things don't exist today. I mean, should not. So probably one of the solutions that today we saw as a lake house could be one of the solutions that one could look at the future. But anything that comes in should be real time, and anything that goes out should be real time. It cannot be an offline kind of a situation where I have a warehouse or a whatever kind of a structure which gives me offline data. And that needs to be seamlessly integrated to my front end, to my customer service, to my sales team, so that they have real time data across. So the data, the only thing is whether it's structured data, unstructured data, streaming, all the formats of data which needs to come in needs to be made available to two important people or three important people. One is the sales team, second is the back office customer service team, and operations or the management for real-time reporting. And that's something which is really important. So if a structure like this exists and that works as what was shown and demonstrated with HSBC and Coin and other examples, I think that's the way to drive the thing in future, because that's the one which will help do machine learning and do AI. I don't think any other way of doing, unless machine learning, it has to learn from the data. It has to learn from real-time experiences. So you need vast amount of data to do that. And the same case, once you finish ML, then you can go to NER, NLP, and AI as we go through the route of the 5 layers of AI. Then you can go through that route. So unless you get the data real time where it is studied so that it kicks in, and then finally it results in an output of an AI which can predict at some point in time with all the kind of algorithms that you put in place to do that, it should really work. That's my view.
Right. Mr. Jadhav, you heard Mr. Deepu and Mr. Kumar also talk about it. Now, when we talk about a data warehouse, it requires a very time-consuming ETL process to then, move data from the system of records to the data warehouse. How do you see data lakehouse solving some of that complexity? Do you see it as a logical approach forward?
Yeah, so I think we will still, I mean, in our world, we'll still have to live with the data warehouse, right? That will always be there, and we also have a Teradata warehouse. But we'll have to think of newer and newer ways where I can get the relevant data, like Ion said, to cloud or to a platform where it can be used to compute or to generate valuable insights. So it'll always, I mean, according to me, it'll always have a hybrid approach where you'll still have the traditional data warehouses, but you'll also have this cutting edge data, lakehouse kind of concept where only the relevant data can be pulled as and when required, used to compute and gain meaningful insight from that.
Now, Ion, in your presentation, you spoke about the reduce, reuse, repurpose model. So, how do you think when technology leaders or business leaders are grappling with their spaghetti architecture that they've created, how do you think Databricks can help them solve the challenge of ease of use, simplification of their architecture, the removal of friction? How do you think you can help your customers achieve what they've set out to with their data and AI strategy?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I'll answer it as a previous customer, because I'll go back on that experience. When previously to Databricks, I was the CDO for a private equity firm. And we had a portfolio of 17 different businesses that we had to bring together. So quite a tricky problem, because we had to solve for some of the needs that they had architecturally inside those business. And then we also wanted to bring all of the data back together at the group level. And we had to figure out how do we solve that. And we did a kind of a study across all the different technologies, all the different vendors, and we tried to figure out how do we solve this. And the way I pictured in the end, and what led to the Databricks Lakehouse architecture component, was when I started visualizing your data world almost like the 4 layers of the earth. So I visualize it as you've got an inner core, an outer core, a mantle, and a crust. No matter what tools you use or what platforms you use, those are the 4 basic layers. And what you can do is you can visualize the inner core as your cloud provider. That is your storage, your compute engine that provides you the ability. But it's somewhat static in what it does for the organization. It lives very, very far behind the scenes. Where Databricks comes in is that next layer, which is your outer core. That's the processing layer where you actually give power to that inner core and unleash its potential. And then on top of that, you've got the mantle, which is essentially your governance layer. Now, if you think about it, even in geology, that mantle component is what gives the landscape its its perspective, its view, its feel, and everything. And that's very much your governance layer. That's how it should operate. Your governance layer should live around your core, both cores, and give the landscape its shape and size. And then on top of that, you've got the crust, which is the thin consumption and delivery component. And what's great about the Databricks architecture and that ecosystem of services is that it speaks to at least three of those those four layers. It speaks to the outer core, the mantle, and the crust. Because in the outer core, it provides you with that engineering component, that processing layer. In the mantle, it provides you with that governance ability to build a really strong operational governance entity that provides you with a proper landscape. And then in your crust layer, it provides you with that warehouse component that is super important because no business can function without it. But it also provides you with protocols, for instance, to do data sharing, which we utilized a lot when we had 17 different businesses and you had to collate information. We all know the landscape of emails and Excel attachments and FTP servers and Dropbox and SharePoints. And we did away with all of that and we replaced it with this seamless sharing ecosystem that was built off the backbone of this Databricks Lakehouse for financial services. So that's what helps accelerate that journey, is that when you look at it from that perspective and you realize that this world essentially contains four different layers, you can simplify three of those layers with a single unified platform.
Now we'll move into a quick wrap up because we have a second panel as well, and I don't want to keep everyone waiting here. I'd like to understand from each of you, all three of you, when we talk about modern data architectures, they need to be so futuristic that they should allow organizations to leverage technologies like AI, ML, automation, IoT. So what are some of the best practices that organizations should adopt in trying to create a modern data architecture? We'll start with you, Mr. Jadhav.
I think, like Jan said, one thing that's need of the hour is a unified data architecture or unified data platform. And I believe as we move forward, it's not just like whether it's a traditional data warehouse or a data lake, or like I mentioned, how do I make it flexible to consume data from my digital ecosystem partners, right? Plus, there's also going to be a whole India stack that government of India is going to unleash in the next 4 to 5 years, where customers' health data is going to be available. So how do I have a unified data platform that can talk to each four of these things, whether it's my traditional data warehouse, my data lake, my partner's data warehouse in some cases like say Ola or Make My Trip, and also the government of India, India stack. And how do I pull it all to really create value or pre-approved next best offers for customer? I think that's going to be one of the key practice. And second quick one I'll just wrap up is we talk about AI ML. So I think we should invest in creating AI ML models. When we also started, it took us about an year or so to improve the accuracy of our voice bots or email bots to identify customer intents. So it's a journey. Or when we are building our AI/ML based life insurance underwriting model, we had to run it parallelly for about 1.5 years with the manual underwriting happening with our underwriters till we got the relevant accuracy to match that decision making. So I think AI/ML is a journey, and I think the sooner you start investing it, the better you will be in a long run. So that's right.
So being able to take advantage of the emerging technologies and the ecosystem opportunities that arise. Mr. Kumar, what do you feel should be adopted, should be done to adopt a future-ready architecture?
I think the most important thing is the trust in the data. That's beyond doubt, because unless there's trust in the data, nobody is going to use it. The second important point is the real-time availability of data, capturing it across all touch points. So whether it's digital, physical, whatever be the media, capturing those data, ability to analyze that data, maximize the usage of data in various templates and format, finally use it for machine language, and then move to AI. So those are the areas which I think one should go in, and that's the way one needs to proceed, because unless you go through a process of managing data, governing it, strategizing it, putting it in place, I think it would be very difficult to jump into AI models unless you have absolute trust in your data. So that's one of the key areas which I see. So there's a 5-layer process, just like AI comprises of 5 layers. Here also, the whole process of data comprises of these 4 or 5 steps, which will actually make AI and ML more predictable, and can really be used in its truest sense.
Right, so I'll keep it very crisp. I think they've covered all the points. So just 2 points from my side. One is we're talking about an ecosystem. So I think one of the key and the most important best practices is to ensure data is secure at every stage, not just internally but externally as well. The other is in the Indian context, and a dimension which we typically fail to explore is also ensuring multilingual availability of data. So the customers, all of them don't speak one language. So across the entire spectrum, how can we store, retrieve, and service the customer in language of his choice? I think that also becomes a very good best practice to get an advantage.
Perfect. Now, Ion, how does Databricks take a longitudinal view of your customers' functions and use cases across the FSI vertical? What are some of the ways in which your innovation is getting informed by their business priorities and the competitive pressures within their industry?
100%. I think it's entirely driven by that customer need. It's very important. We had this conversation earlier today.
Can you share some references, customer reference stories, very quickly?
So some of them are really tricky to share because it's some of the conversations happen behind closed doors. But we recently, for instance, had a conversation with a customer in Singapore where they had additional needs around lineage. So we recently moved our data cataloging tool called Unity Catalog into general availability. And it's making life a lot simpler for a lot of customers. And then when we sat down with this customer, they had specific asks around how do we actually go beyond the traditional ways of lineage. And they had really concrete examples of how they wanted to do different things. And that gets immediately fed back to the product team. And we will take that and then we actively will move to develop that and build those features in. I think one of the other areas that always makes a bit, or was probably one of the biggest customer references, if you just look at the core storage component of what Databricks does, which is Delta Lake, that entire piece of software was co-developed by one of our biggest customers, who we can't necessarily name, but you might know them as a very big fruit company. But if you look at that entire use case that they had a problem with processing up to 6 petabytes of data every day. And the typical approach just couldn't cut it. And Delta Lake was entirely developed initially for that company to give them that efficiency to do what they needed to do. And I think that shows the ethos of Databricks as a company, where we will literally create an entire product for specifically just off the back of one customer's needs, when we see that value to then cross-cut that across other industries and share that efficiency, which now all of our customers are gaining from it. I think that showcases that approach to having it led by what the customers need.
Thank you so much, Jan. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for sharing your insights and real-world perspectives on this topic. I think in the time that we had, we covered a lot of ground in terms of the need for better customer experiences that are led by AI and data intelligence, the need for creating simplified data architectures with a focus on security, with a focus on agility, and being able to take up, ecosystem opportunities and the new opportunities that emerging technologies bring, the role of data lakehouse in improving manageability and also dealing with data silos. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for sharing your thoughts with us. Thank you. Ion, I'd like you to give a token of appreciation to all our panelists here. Can we have a thunderous round of applause for our panelists? We now move on to the second panel of the evening. The topic for this discussion is creating a master checklist for a modern data strategy. May I now call upon stage our panelists, Dhaval Pandya, Corporate CIO, Piramal Enterprises, Mufazzal Arif, Senior Vice President, Data Sciences, HDFC Bank, Dipesh Karki, Co-founder and CTO, Lane Dane Club, Yashwant Lodha, Co-founder, Pay Nearby, and once again, Ion Retif, Technical Director, Databricks. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us. Now, they say three things happen naturally in any organization: friction, silos, and underperformance. For everything else, you need a strategy. Now, when we talk about new data led initiatives, you need to put culture first and technology second. You reverse the order and you're in for trouble. And in his presentation, Ion also mentioned the fact that you need to build trust with data. So the proper order would be trust, culture, and then technology. Now, to solve this conundrum of building a data culture, we have with us a very illustrious group of panelists who are trying to achieve this feat within their organization. So we'll try and pick their brains to try and understand what are the key components of a data-driven culture within organizations to then be able to create an intelligent enterprise. So we'll start with Dipesh. Dipesh, the future of finance is data, as we've already understood with these years of tectonic change in the BFSI industry. Now, data culture is critical to move the needle on data intelligence within financial services companies. So can you tell us about the data culture at your organization, and how have you gone about creating that maturity, organizational maturity towards dealing with data and the various dimensions that you see to this equation?
So, being a startup, I think data is something that was there to us from day one, right? And the culture around it was also there ingrained without having to ask for it. So, the type of people that we bring into the organization as you start building, right, are the ones who understand the nitty gritties around what data are, how you bring data to a user interface through APIs, etc. So, they do understand the technological lingos. So, that was never a challenge for us. However, when we move from startup to scaled up, we realize that you can't have just one kind of people into the organization. You need to have people from various backgrounds, right? Some of them are from startups, some of them are from scaled up organizations, and some of them are from enterprises, right? So, and many of those do come from BFSI who have recently started the journey from a physical to a physical to a digital transformation. So, in order to cater to all of these kind of masses, we realize that we do need to build some data culture, to make sure that, you know, all of the mindset, or all the kind of people that are working there are aligned towards bringing in innovations, keeping in view that the data that you are, having access to or the privilege to is something that is also the asset of the company and requires a lot of attention. So we have broadly categorized our data practices into three major categories. That is data discovery, data intelligence, and then data governance. So basically, when it comes to data discovery, we need to give our staffs right kind of interactions, right kind of interfaces through which they can get access to the relevant kind of data that they need in order to make any kind of decision, right? Data intelligence is what I call as, the smartest, to read and interpret that data. Right? I may give a data to you, but then you may or may not be able to make the kind of decision that is required for the organization. So for that, we do periodic training, to make sure that whoever are interacting with the data do understand what is the meaning of the data and how did it come into that particular structure and how to build a relevant information out of it. And the third one is definitely data governance. So being a privileged staff in an organization, you do get access to a lot of data, right? Of course, there are strata wherein, there are senior level executives or senior level members who do have access to a lot of data, while there are junior staff who would have access to a controlled set of data, right? So with that comes governance plays an important role wherein when they have these kind of informations in hand, how do they make the right use of it? So for that, a lot of things come into picture, right kind of data security in place, right? The policies around how you upload, download the data, etc., etc. How you mask customer sensitive data to ensure that there is no data leakage intentionally or unintentionally. So these are the major things that we have been imbibing in our organization to make sure that all of us are aware about how customers are handling data, because this is something that not just we as an organization that are trying to imbibe, but that's something that even the government is trying to push in order to make sure that we are protecting the rights of the customer and the informations about the customers that we have privilege or entitled to.
That was a very well-rounded response, Dipesh. Now we move to Mr. Arif. to another end of the spectrum. You are from a legacy bank. You've lots and lots of data across the years that you've accumulated from your customers. How are you trying to put together the people, process, and technology pieces of this jigsaw puzzle to drive that culture of data so that everyone speaks the same language of data?
So I think during the lockdown, we came up with this a very simple concept of collaboration, which we call as a pod, and that is actually working across teams, right? So it's your uh, probably your IT, your product, your process, your data analytics, everybody. And everybody, when it gets into a room across a product, has to speak only one language is data. There is one more thing which we've implemented, and I think we've been very successful doing that. It's in the last 24 months, is the art of asking questions, right? We have a lot of data, but we do not have the right questions. So the power of growth hacking, which you should get into the organization, is very, very important, right? You need growth hackers in your team who is asking the right question. You have a lot of data. We as Legacy Bank have tons and tons of data, right? But asking the right question, how do I use it? So you concentrate more on W's than on H. That's the culture we brought into it.
Right. Now, Yashwant, it is said that it's always a beautiful question that asks a more beautiful answer. So, how do you decide what questions to ask of the data, taking a thread from what Mr. Arif said?
A lot of people tend to ask a lot of questions with data. The problem with data, when left out in the open, is all sorts of relationships can be built around it. Some of them, and the causality of those relationships are not established. In fact, many of the time it ends up being wrong. So it's very, very important that right questions are being asked. What we try and do, at least in our organization, is we we try and avoid paralysis because of too much analysis. To my mind, it creates a lot of issues. If we have a bunch of people in a group viewing the same kind of data, it is best if people ask questions that pertain to their subject matter expertise, number one. Yes, that does not mean that cross viewing or cross questioning of data is not done, but most of the times such right questions for people who need it for their own purpose. And we try and ask people to ask two or three kinds of questions. Something that you want answered for now, something that you want answered 3 months from now, something that you want data do. What should this data tell you 1 year from now? This is kind of putting a structure to the question asking frame, right? It may box a little bit, but for people who are new into the asking question game, it helps. Obviously, as people evolve, right, and people learn to see data, they evolve that wrong causalities need not be established. Just because there is a relationship does not mean there's causality. Such frameworks can get fully broken up. But for the uninitiated, this is how we try and do it in our organization.
Now, Mr. Pandya, in your observation and experience, how do you think organizational DNA should be made more data driven, right from the back office to the front lines to the executive management? How do you create that culture of appreciation for data led intelligence across the enterprise?
Thanks a lot. A very good evening to all of you. I think there was enough and more evidence provided in all the sessions before that, no amount of technology can solve our problems unless and until there is good adoption of it. And with data in particular, I think, in my personal opinion, where most organizations go wrong is that they try to infuse data into the system to say that they are challenging the conventional practices. And that's where I think a lot of friction comes in, and there is a lot of negativity, or people feel threatened with regards to the infusion of data into the system. A better way to do it, or maybe the right way to do it, is to say that it is there to support the decisions that are being made. So the question should not, so it should not be that data is questioning the decision makers. Otherwise, the decision makers start questioning data, and there are enough and more efforts being put in to prove that the data is incorrect or irrelevant to the decisions that are being made. So first and foremost, I think empathy. There is absolutely no substitute for that. To say that, okay, we are here to provide you tools that will help you take better decisions, or take them in lesser amount of time with lesser effort. That's number one. Number two, it's important to understand that not everybody needs the same type of data in an organization. Clearly, like you say, it could be strategic, it could be tactical, it could be operational. So it's not necessary that in operational level you're trying to infuse a data which is more strategic in nature, because that's not solving his problem here and now. It's not aiding the person in doing anything better. So, while there will be the classical journey from say descriptive to diagnostic to predictive to prescriptive, it's important to understand what fits where and allow it its time to, gradually mature it from the point that it is to the next level. The third and the important thing is that, like you mentioned, do not take mere maybe coincidences for reasons. For example, it's a classic saying, at least in Mumbai, that one day it rains extremely heavily, the next day there is a red alert issued, and then it doesn't rain. So is there actually a relation between the two facts that it didn't rain and that a warning was issued? Absolutely not. So it's important to understand the data lineage, more importantly, and that's where I think the appreciation for data needs to be created within our organization to say that it's an asset which can help you, which if you invest in, it is bound to give you returns. So, for example, simple facts like I was in another session the other day where a question was posed. It was full of CIOs. A question was posed that, okay, who can put his hand on heart here and say that he knows every single type of data generated in his organization and how it is managed? And people were truthful enough and nobody raised their hands. It's a complex problem to solve. That's need to be appreciated. So clearly look at it in three parts. Again, any digital intervention depends on people, process, and technology. So for people, it is important to enable them with the right type of data and empower them to use that data. Like he was talking about data democratization. Easier said than done, because everyone wants to keep it close to their chest. When it comes to processes, are your processes immutable, or is the data getting generated from the processes open to question, or is it questionable? So are you having a single source of data? Are you having the right data governance processes and procedures in place? For example, are you having the right tools, and are you making sure that only the right kind of people are accessing the right type of data? So it covers an entire gamut of privacy, classification, all of it. And the last is the technology, like rightly mentioned. Do you have the right technology which can hold this data, which can harness the data, manage the data, and basically help you monetize it?
Now, Mr. Arif, how are you dealing with the challenge of the functional silos that come with data? How do you see that hindering better data adoption, and what are you doing to kind of counter that challenge?
So we're still facing that siloness, and I think everybody in the organization, every organization faces siloness, right? So we're working towards it. It's not that we have a lake or a data lake right now in place. We're working towards it. And the one thing which we implemented in the last couple of years is very good is the feedback loop, right? So we're getting a lot of these conversations of when we contact the customer in terms of email, SMS, WhatsApp, chatbot, etc., wherever every touch point we're trying to take back, and the silo still remains, and it's a journey. Very frankly speaking, it's not going to happen overnight. So, yep, and I don't. That's about it.
Right. Now, Eon, you heard the gentleman here talk about some of the challenges that they brought up, some of the ways in which they are trying to work around the challenges of creating a data-driven culture. What are some of the key pain points that you see organizations face in their journey towards data-led intelligence? What are some of the things that you've seen with your customers?
So, I mean, it comes back to the old thing that we've been discussing. It's culture, right? So the problem is, if you don't have a good culture, you're going to struggle to get adoption, and then you're going to struggle to unlock value. And the challenge is that people don't necessarily understand some of the core responsibilities in building that culture. I always say that a good data culture centers around three core things. It centers around inspiration, empowerment, and reward. So it's about having a leadership team that inspires the business, that actually showcases that they truly consult the data, that they actually want to be data-led, not just say it in an annual report, but actually consult it as part of their strategic decision-making process, no matter how flawed it is in the beginning, but you have to start somewhere. And then once you've inspired, you also need to target your investment to enable and empower. Because if you can't build that feedback loop to your team where they can actually build insights that you can consult with ultimate trust, because it's a two-way street there, you're never going to get to that point. And then the third component is the reward. Actually, and it's not monetary. Everyone always thinks it's monetary. It's about actually adding value to your team by showing them how that part that you've consulted of the data truly realizes in the business. So whether that is someone that had an idea, we spoke about growth hacking earlier, which I thought was a great way of viewing it. Companies tend to say we're going to build a center of excellence or we're going to have an innovation hub. I tend to believe that it's not something you can box, because what should happen is you should unleash the power to everyone in the organization, and they should bring the ideas forward, no matter where they sit. But it's then your responsibility to reward that by taking those insights and actually making it a tangible product or a service in your business where you see fit. But you have to do all three of those things, and companies really struggle with that. The problem is, if we look at the three things, people, process, and technology, I always say, if you take budget out of the equation, because budget dictates everything, but let's take budget out of the equation, any organization, no matter what industry or what sector, only has three levers to pull to get where they want to be. And that's people, process, and technology. Historically, technology was the most difficult thing to do, which has led to over-engineering, sloppy architecture, lack of governance, all of that. But that's also bred the problems that we see in people and process, because that world governed that we build unnecessary due process, and that's bred a certain kind of people. Today, technology is the easiest thing to fix. We can fix technology like that. We need to get that out of the way quickly so that we can focus on fixing the people and the process, because that's the challenging bit. That's why culture is so important.
Right. Dipesh, most organizations struggle with getting a single view of the truth when it comes to the data. How do you deal with this challenge? What have you done right to get a single source of truth when it comes to data across teams, functions, systems, departments?
There are two parts to it, right? First, you need to know where your data are kept, right? And second, you need to know how you are going to fetch that data and provide it to the relevant team. It's just like building information out of it, right? So the right way to do it is, you'll definitely have segregation layers. There will be some staffs in your organization who need only a relevant data. I mean, only a certain part of data for for their general analytical purpose. I think Yaswant and I were discussing it some times ago, wherein my team need not know on a real-time basis whether I should be making a credit decision based on the just the previous customer's behavior. I just need to know the historic record till the previous day, right? So you need to have a right classification of your data, number one. Number two, there are staffs that do interact with customers on a frequent basis, right? For them, they would need right kind of data in the right place. So they would need direct access to your IO with, of course, relevant checks in place, right? With a make a checker policy. So that is second thing that you would do. So for that purpose, you need your active database to be directly connected to their interactive portals. And beyond that, there will be people who would be directly interact with customers and who would be just trying to solve the customer's query. They may be customer support, they may be relationship managers or anyone. For them, they may or may not even need that data. They may simply need to raise a ticket, and the relevant team will get that particular issue or particular situation sorted for them, right? So you need to have right kind of policy to classify your data, give it to the relevant team as per the need, and make sure that you know where the data is coming from, how you are classifying that data, how you are keeping it in order, and how you are fetching it during the data presentation. So I think that's the right way to do it.
Now, Yashwant, you've already achieved a certain level of data dexterity within your organization. So how do you then take it forward, and how do you empower your people to test, learn, and experiment with data to then take your data intelligence journey forward?
I think this, to my mind, at least how we do it in our organization, is nothing specific that we do about data for this. It's about the standard process of taking a success, making a big pomp and show about it, and making sure that more people want to be part of that pomp, right? So, for example, if I have done a good job with data, I've taken a right decision.
So how do you create that culture of creating quick wins with data?
So like I said, right, if there is, so we'll just give you an example. Recently, very, very recently, we did one product review with about 15 odd people. Some of them were leaders, some of them were one downs, right? couple of questions came out, quite a few action items questions came out. 2 of them got implemented in about 12 days of this period, right? Fairly quick. We can debate whether it is quick or quick enough or not, but those 2 got done. In this month-end meeting, we got those 2 celebrated, right? These guys did it very, very quickly. Now there is already an urgency in the rest of the teams to act upon their areas of win. And you keep doing this repeatedly. I think it's about persistence. First, we have to want to make it to happen. Like you were saying, right, it should not be a matter of a board report that I did 2 things. I need to want it enough, and then I need to make a pomp and show of the success story, and then keep repeating it.
Right. Now, Mr. Pandya and Mr. Arif, I want to address this question to both of you. How do you build trust with your data? How do you make sure that bias doesn't creep in, which it always does, but how do you make sure that those incidents are reduced? How do you build trust with the data to then thrive that culture across your organization?
That's a very tough question, but still. Right? So look, trust is something which, as a lot of my panelists and before they say, right, you need to trust your data, and it's always the results which talks about it, right? When you present something to your seniors, when you present something with the board or something like that, you actually talk about numbers, and that's how the trust and ultimately is the final goal. In our case, it's more of a conversion, it's more of a business, right? So if that holds true, and I think that's the trust. Second is in the banking environment, the compliance issues, regulation issues, a lot of there, right? So you need to be a little careful on that, where do I step, how far do I go, and how far I should not go. So that's.
Mr. Pandya?
I think that, and it doesn't harm to do a data quality assessment on a periodic basis. I think that really helps, especially you need to do with your most important set of data, where you are questioning whether it is still being stored with those basic atomicity principles of data management. That is a good guide that tells you whether your processes are working fine or not. And the second thing is that you need to look at with all your data governance processes, the number of exceptions that you're going through. That somewhere also tells you whether largely the processes are good or not, and if there are too many exceptions, there is a good chance that that data quality is not as good as it should be.
With that, we'll move into a quick wrap up. Dipesh, can we start with you? What is it that you have now learned in the course of your data journey, but you wish you knew earlier, something that you could do better in hindsight, and any learnings that you could impart to our audience here?
So whenever I used to go for vacation during my school days, what I used to do is I used to collect all my clothes, just wrap it in my bag, rush, right? And when the time came to wear it, I always have to bring it out, press it, right, iron it, and then only I had to wear, right? The latter part was quite troublesome. This is something that happens even with data. You know that there are data that you have to structure, right? But then you just are in a hurry to just build that data and you just let it go, right? And later on, the big trouble comes in wherein likes of Databricks have to come in, to make your data more meaningful, right? I mean, those are the irons that you need, or the press that you need, to make your data more sensible. So this is something that I've learned. If you know how to structure your data, if you think your data can be structured, structure it to the best possible so that you don't have to face trouble of structuring it in the near future. Otherwise, it will be very difficult for you to build information out of it. However, there are some data that you can't structure. Let that be dumped the way it is supposed to be dumped. Don't worry on that part.
It solves the problem of technical debt.
Absolutely.
Yashwant?
So what I've learned is that I think I should have celebrated, and we should have celebrated in our organization, the wins. A data-driven decision, what value did it add vis-a-vis a data-driven decision that went wrong, right? Or a data-not-driven decision that went wrong. Now, that is something that I think that celebration, that clear elucidation of benefits should have been done a little bit more earlier. And the second point that he mentioned, structure it at the time of getting it. I think that is something that we should have done better than what we did.
Right. Mr. Pandya?
So I think putting in an enterprise-wide data strategy and a platform is something that we could have done a little earlier in the day than we did, because what it has somewhere led to is, and through a natural progression again, is that there are different levels of maturity, tools and processes which are in the organization now. Now consolidating that and bringing them onto one platform for obvious reasons of putting in the right data governance and especially with the data privacy and the data protection act stuff coming in, the more disparate your landscape is, the more difficult it will be to implement and to govern it. So if we could have done that a little earlier, I think it would be a lot easier. And second is, it wouldn't have this aspect of having users switch from something that they are already used to something new, because I think inertia is the biggest problem in dealing with technological issues.
I think everybody has covered all the points. So I'll just keep the last point is, whatever data you get, keep doing it, but keep experimenting. Experiment, learn. And as you say, the MVP, the minimum viable product, just get into production, learn from it, and keep improvising it. That's how we're going to all solve it together.
Right.
So I think everybody covered.
Ian, any word of advice you would have for our audiences?
So, I mean, I'll end off with this. At the end of the day, you've got to think about why are we doing all of this, right? So at the end of the day, the idea is that you want to turn your data into an asset. So you've got to think about that, and I think someone mentioned it earlier. At the end of the day, companies are rethinking the balance sheet. And we're doing a lot of speaking at the moment with customers around how do you start thinking about putting data on the balance sheet? Data's got all the properties of being treated like an asset, yet no company out there today is in the position to capitalize data as an asset on the balance sheet. And the challenge that I always give companies is, whether you realize it or not, data's already on your balance sheet. It sits there as a liability. The inability to leverage your data effectively today leads to increased cost, and that's a liability. So organizations don't realize that. And I think, so that's the one thing, is start to think about those value measures that I spoke about earlier. Start to think about where you want to play, the fundamental value, the financial value. Start to build your data strategy and figure out where do you want to go with it. And then one very important learning that I'll share that I've seen all too often. Organizations tend to forget and misunderstand the difference between where data is created and where it's consumed. And the biggest challenge with ML and AI and all of these things that we're doing in the end is all of that lives in the space where we consume it. But if you can't operationalize that back into your world where you use it to recreate new data, you're never going to get to that point where you've got this cyclical world, that flywheel that we like to talk about in data. So whatever you do, whatever architecture you go with, whatever pattern you think about, whatever strategy you take, think about the way that you want to value your data. How do you ultimately plan to put it on the balance sheet? Tangible or intangible, but think about that. And in that journey, think about how you're going to operationalize all of these insights. It's easy to operationalize a data warehouse. It's very, very difficult to operationalize ML and AI. And I've seen millions and millions and millions of dollars go to waste because organizations fail to ask that question up front in a project. So think about those two things.
Thank you so much, Ian. You made my job easier. You also summed up the entire learnings of this panel. Thank you so much. So I think when it comes to building a data culture, the earlier you start, the better it is, like in most things in life. And with that, we will wrap up this panel. Thank you so much, everyone. You've been a very patient audience. I would request Ian to hand over a token of appreciation to our panelists.
Thank you very much.
I have a small announcement to make. Please scan the QR code and fill out the feedback form, which is on your table. And a tree will be planted in your name by the Databricks team. So please do fill out the feedback form. And with that, I'd like to hand it back to Anil to express his thanks to the audience and the panelists who participated in this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Sneha. I'm the most hated guy because it's 9:05 and a lot of people are looking at. I'll keep it very brief, 60 seconds. We are here to help, right? I think clearly Ion has already enunciated the fact that we look at things differently. It's a customer first era. So everything really revolves around the customer experience, and we reverse engineer our thought process around how do we become a business differentiator for helping you drive revenues with the customer, making your offerings profitable. So just think of us as a strategic partner that can help you drive data strategies or help you build a data strategy or validate that, help you think about what is the best data architecture that we've seen around the globe working with many of your peers. How do we help you, either create or co-create a data culture that really helps you benefit from an overall, data first organizational mission. We are here. If you have any questions, Ion is here. Please feel free. But I really want to thank you. Thank you for your evening. Thank you for your time. And again, thank you for coming and attending to us. If there's any other feedback, just feel free. We are around. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.